Hey classes, happy Friday. It's Mr. Hayes checking in on May 22nd. Today's work is going to be a little bit of a break from writing full paragraphs. At this point in our movie review, we should have the intro paragraph written, we should have our summary paragraph, we should have at least 3 body paragraphs with reasons and evidence, and we should have our counterclaim completed. Today we're going to look back at those paragraphs we've already written and see where we can add figurative language. Figurative language is something that is covered in great depth during the Romeo and Juliet unit, which unfortunately we had to bypass this year. It just didn't fit with our virtual learning. And so we haven't covered it in the depth that I had hoped going into the year. But this will be an opportunity to get caught up a little bit on some of those parts that were missing, and give you a chance to integrate some figurative language terms into the movie review, especially ones that make the most sense with this type of writing. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's jump into our module with announcements. So today's checklist, after you watch this video, your job is to add 2 or 3 sentences of figurative language to your movie review. It shouldn't take you too long. I wouldn't expect you to take 30, 40, 50 minutes on this. If you can come up with 2 great sentences that use the different figurative language options that I will present in a minute, you have done your job for today. We will then write our conclusion next week. And that's the only other full paragraph that we have to do for this movie review. But right now, 2 to 3 examples of figurative language is the goal for Friday's work. No optional sessions today because it's technically a half day for everyone. That's why I limited the amount of work that's on your plate today. But of course, you can always reach out through email if you have any questions. So today's teaching point is that critics establish strong voice by using different types of figurative language. Now, voice is a term that we talked about on Monday. Establishing a distinct voice in our writing, I was very grateful for what Dead Poets Society has done for my life. So you want to be consistent with that voice throughout, and figurative language is a great way to incorporate that voice that you chose within your writing. It gives you a chance to do some really complex sentences, and figurative language, more than anything else, is a way to get the reader to realize that you've taken some time to really think this through. Your writing is of great quality because you spent that extra time crafting a sentence at a very high writing level with a deeper meaning behind it. Figurative language sentences are not easy to write, and so the more you can incorporate them, the more of an expert writer you are perceived to be by the person reading, in this case, your movie review. So the mini lesson video will be posted here when I'm done, and let's jump into the application activity. So as I said, 2 to 3 examples of figurative language. You can put them in any paragraph you like. You can do both in one. You can spread them out, totally up to you. Here's our typical links to get to our Google Doc with our movie review housed on it. And let's walk through then today's slides. I will also attach here a link to the Dead Poet Society movie review. You may have noticed this in yesterday's module. This is the one I've been working on with you. So I will add my figurative language sentences to that and post that for your reference as well. So today's slides. As always, our opening slide I mostly cover in the module already, so I won't talk about that too long. But here's our teaching point. I'll post the video here, and then the same schedule we've discussed. So what is figurative language? A lot of you know this already, so I'll be brief. But figurative language uses different figures of speech, like similes, metaphors, personification, hyperbole, allusions, etc., onomatopoeia, to be more effective, persuasive, and impactful. If you are able to write a great figurative language sentence, and we usually do this with Shakespeare because he was sort of the inventor of this in a way of doing it in a very meaningful and incredibly moving tone. But it's such an effective way of writing. It's persuasive to the reader, and it's very impactful. It makes that reader stop and think. Figures of speech such as metaphors, similes, and allusions go beyond the literal meanings to give new insights. It's figurative language because it's something that's stated figuratively, not literally, so it takes some interpretation from the reader's side. So there's really 3 types of figurative language that I think would fit really well with this movie review. Well, it's 3.5 if you count simile and metaphor together. But these are the 3 I've boiled it down to. First is that simile or that metaphor. Either one is a comparison. In the case of a simile, it's using like or as, a metaphor does not. So for example, you might make a comparison in your movie review to something in the film, In this case, my example is an actor. Sam Jackson's performance is like a tall glass of lemonade on a hot summer's day, satisfying to the core. So you may be able to use a simile or a metaphor either positively or negatively. The most common one in a movie review, especially in an argument essay like this where you're trying to make a point, is to use hyperbole. Hyperbole is an exaggerated statement or claim not meant to be taken literally. Something like, I could eat a horse if you're really hungry, is an example of hyperbole. So you might say, we're describing your reaction to a scene or a moment in the film or your takeaway from it. You might use hyperbole to exaggerate the effect it had on you. The scene was so tense by the end I was sweating buckets. Was it, did I literally have buckets in front of me and they're filled up and overflowing with sweat? Of course not. But that makes that idea of, man, the scene was tense seem even more impactful. And then there's something called an illusion. This is an illusion with an A, not the I illusion that starts with an I, where it's like a dream or a vision you have that may not be entirely true. An A illusion with an A is a reference to something. It's a reference to something that's common in culture or history or society. Oftentimes, Shakespeare used something like mythology allusions like Cupid's arrow. Juliet was hit with Cupid's arrow. That's a reference to a character in Greek mythology or something that's referenced in the Bible is they had a Cain and Abel type relationship, would be something like that. For an illusion, you may reference a different movie you've seen, you may reference a different actor, you may, in the case of mine here, be able to use a reference from mythology if you think that that might help and you have the capacity to do so. DiCaprio's Achilles heel, that's a term meaning his weakness, is playing someone who tries to be romantic. And he plays, Leonardo DiCaprio plays Romeo in the 90s version of Romeo and Juliet. So I did use an allusion to the Achilles story there. That might be tough for you to do if you want to do a Google search and find out some common uses of allusion with Greek or any other type of cultural mythology you can try, or a biblical one. That would be really cool if you could do that. But if not, you just may use it to reference something in history and in popular culture in current society that would count as an allusion too. I'll give you another example of that in a second. So here is my use of figurative language. So I took one of the body paragraphs out. It's just sort of random which one I chose. You may start with a body paragraph you choose. Actually, this is precisely the process I went through. I started with a body paragraph and I looked for ways I could use figurative language. And I didn't find any. Just nothing fit. So I went to another body paragraph. And this is the one that I ended up settling on. So sometimes it might take you a few tries to find where that great fit is to use figurative language. But I did find that fit for me. And you can see how I took one of those body paragraphs. In this case, it is the story of Neil and the amazing job that Robert John Leonard did playing that character. I used that body paragraph, that reason, to incorporate my figurative language. I did some color coding here. So you can see the illusion in green, you can see the hyperbole in yellow, and the simile in red. I'd like to read that through and talk you through why I chose these pieces of figurative language. Neil's character is a centerpiece of this coming of age story, and for good reason. Leonard plays the role with a young Matt Damon like vulnerability in Good Will Hunting. So, this is a movie that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck wrote in the 90s. Kind of, they burst onto the scene, and Matt Damon plays a character at a similar age of Neil in Dead Poet Society. And he's someone who has to kind of grow up and figure out what his priorities are in his life, just like Neil. It's a very famous movie and one that vaulted Matt Damon to stardom. So this illusion is something that's a reference to popular culture, another movie that a lot of readers of my review would get and would understand. Alternating back and forth between brash confidence and a subtle fear of failure and disappointing his influential father, a realistic conflict in an era where succumbing to these authority figures wasn't an option. In one scene, after his secret acting gig was discovered, time well wasted according to Mr. Perry, Neil's father gives him a brief opening, imploring him to tell me how you really feel. So I thought this might be a good example to use some hyperbole to really capture the essence of what Neil was feeling here. The words Neil wants to say seem to weigh 1,000 pounds in his throat. So he can't get out what he really wants to say. It's weighing him down. Does it actually weigh 1,000 pounds, these words? Of course not. As he simply settles for whispering nothing. Then I did a comparison with Leonard's acting here. Leonard's acting is never more impressive. Each facial expression as painful as someone, so I use as there, as painful as someone whose future is slipping through their fingertips, making a comparison to what the character Neil is feeling in this scene. So as I said before, you can have all of your figurative language examples in one paragraph. You can mix them up, intersperse them throughout. It's totally up to you, but I would like to see you try to use 2 or 3 of these somewhere in your writing today. That's all you have. Have a great weekend. Be back here on Monday with the conclusion paragraph and a few different revision techniques as we finish up our movie review by the end of next week. Let me know if you have any questions, everyone.